let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Ready? Yeah, perfect.
We are
Great.
live.
Very good. Well, good afternoon. This is the regularly scheduled hybrid meeting of the Mercer Island Utility Board. I'm chair of the board, Tim O'Connell. My pleasure to call the meeting to order. Is there someone from the city who can call the roll for the members of the board?
Chair O'Connell,
I am present.
Vice Chair Milton,
Present.
Board Member Majewski,
Present.
Board Member Marshall,
Present.
Board Member Lair,
Here.
Board Member Quantz,
Present.
Board Member Picorni.
Present.
Thank you.
Sounds like we have a quorum. Welcome. First order of business, as always, is to see if there is any member of the public who wishes to address the board.
There's no one signed up to speak this evening.
Very good. Thank you. Let's move on then to regular business. We have approval of the minutes. They were included with the agenda package for our last meeting, which was back in December. I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll move.
I believe that was George.
George.
And second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Meredith. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Looked pretty all right to me. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No, pass unanimously. Very good. Next item of business is, I believe, we go straight to an update about the Seattle Public Utilities pipeline project.
Good evening, utility board members. Jason Kittner, Chief of Operations. I'm going to invite Alan Hunter, our utilities operations manager, to join us this evening. You may recall last year, I believe it was last year, Seattle Public Utilities came to the board and talked about a couple of projects. We have a second scheduled shutdown that is, we thought would be a good opportunity to update the board in terms of the work the SPU is doing and sort of how our city staff and city's team is working with SPU to sort of mitigate the impacts and the upcoming project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hunter.
Thanks, Jason. Now let me share my screen here. Okay. So again, I'm Alan Hunter, the Utilities Operations Manager. Here to kind of tonight to talk about the Seattle Public Utilities Mercer Slough project, which involves water shutdowns to the islands and the scope of work as far as our roles and responsibilities for each group. As you know, Mercer Island gets its water from the Cedar and the Toll River. Comes along with transmission mains that comes along from the east side, Victoria side, and onto the island. What we're looking at here as far as part of SPU's transition to disconnect the Mercer Slough project there is this portion of piping here that's in between these two vaults is the 30-inch line that they are looking to disconnect as far as what's in Mercer Slough. They'll be patching these up and they'll be allowing us to run water through the 16 and back onto the 20 and onto the island. As part of SPU's project scope, the reasoning why they're abandoning that 30-inch is the supports that are holding up the pipe in the Mercer Slough are settling and are unable to stabilize them or replace the supports. So their project is to disconnect that 30-inch pipe from the 16-inch pipeline, upgrade the connection points that are on the 16-inch pump line for more resiliency, and then upgrade the vaults and hatches on the east and west vault. That's part of their project that they're going to be doing in scope of work. Give a little project timeline. Jason said this is 2 shutdowns. Actually, this goes all the way back to December 10th, 2021 was the very first shutdown that we did with SPU. And they were to be replacing one of the 16-inch valves on the west side that allowed them to isolate. That was a 9-hour shutdown that they had with us. After that, we had to kind of take a little break because we had the reservoir project going on at the same time, and we were starting design for a reservoir project, which required us to drain and clean the reservoirs and act individually one at a time, and allow the consultant that we hired for that to do the design to go in and do an assessment. So we took January and February off to allow them to do that. The second shutdown for replacing the other 16-inch line or 16-inch valve on the east side was done on March 29th. So they had scheduled for April 26th and 27th to actually do the complete disconnection of the 30-inch line. On the 26th, they ran into issues. They weren't able to close a valve on the 30-inch line, and then they found that there was another valve on the bypass line that wouldn't close either. So they weren't able to make the disconnection there. And what they ended up happening is what was scheduling for the 27th is they actually had to do the repairs on those components in order just to get water back to us without having to do a bypass. So the 26th and 27th, when they're normally supposed to disconnect the 30-inch line, they ended up having to do repairs on the line. Well, as we get into May, our water system demand starts to pick up, and that pretty much stays a consistent high demand until we get into September. So we've told them that, you know, we can't do this during this time in 2022, but we will look at it come late fall, early 2023. We also have at the reservoir, we also have the chlorine booster system going on. And as part of that is they're doing a lot of piping configuration, not only in the distribution system, but also at this reservoir site itself and inside the gallery. So that project, as far as the piping replacement, started in October of 2022, and it's supposed to be done by the end of this month, 2023. So we gave SPU a timeline that they have to get this done sometime in April, because again, we're going to start the 2023 demand season. And as we get in later, we're going to have the reservoir project for the rest of the year. So they have this narrow window. SPU came back to us and they said, we'll need 72 hours to shut down. We did a model on the system, and the system said, no, we can't give you 72 hours. So in working with SPU, as far as putting a work plan together, which I'll show you next here, is to disconnect the pipelines, 30-inch pipeline from both the east side and the west side. During the week of April 17th through the 21st, we're going to have two separate 44-hour shutdowns with a 24 hours in between the shutdowns to fill our reservoir back up. This here is the SPU work schedule that they came to, that we worked with them, and they came to us to get approval for this. As you can see here, the shutdown will actually start at 12 a.m. on the 17th. That gives them time to kind of drain the line. It gives about 6-7 hours to drain the line before they can even start working. And they're supposed to be back up and running by 8 p.m. on the 18th. Now, before we put water back into our tanks, we're going to have to do some flushing and get the air out and water quality back up to make sure before we put it back in the tank. So we're looking at about another hour, hour and a half of flushing before we can do that. But it still gives us 24 hours to put water back in the tanks. And then on the 20th, the same process now for the West Vault. We're at 12 a.m. on the 20th. They'll start to shut us down, and we'll go through that 44-hour process. So in preparation for this, a couple of things. We originally had a model done back in 2021 for the original shutdown. And of course, we had the configuration change with our chlorine booster system. So we had to take what that design for that and have the system remodeled, not only for that, but also for the longer shutdown. They were asking for 72 hours, and our model came back and said, no, you can't do 72 hours, but you can do 44 hours. And that's why we gave them that option. Other things we have to do as far as preparations, we're doing public outreach, coordination with Mercer Island Fire Department, coordination with the Shorewood complex to supply them water during the shutdown. During these shutdowns, Shorewood is a direct customer with SPU, so we have to supply them water during this shutdown period. And we'll get into that later on how we do that. Coordination with the SPU engineering team, their transmission repair crews, and their control centers. We have to be able to not only work with the transmission control that's doing the repairs, but also the control center that'll allow us to take water during that 24-hour period. And then communications with contractors working on the island, as well as our project managers that are doing CIP projects. This is a pretty critical time because we're running straight off the reservoirs. And so we need these contractors that are doing work in our system, as far as on the water system, to be very careful and not cause any damage or main breaks that we have to respond to. Because like I said, that's all the water we have for that period of time. The Mercer Island team, as far as to plan for the events, at the time of the events there, we're going to fill both tanks prior to the shutdown. We're going to probably take them right up to the overflow point, which is a little over 29 feet prior to the shutdown. The crews are going to be scheduled. We're going to around the clock 24/7. So we'll always have a crew on site, whether day or night, during the shutdown process. We're going to monitor our SCADA system, and that's our supervisory control and data acquisition system, as well as operations of our facilities. And then, of course, once the project is done, then after in between that, we'll be flushing our lines before we send them into our reservoir system. And I mentioned earlier, Shorewood is a direct customer of Seattle Public Utilities. They're actually supplied by Master Meter off of 40th and Greenbrier. So when they shut this island down, they shut Shorewood down. And what we've done in the past is we've provided jumper hydrants in between our system and their system that allows us to provide Shorewood water during this whole process. The water will be metered. As you can see here, this is the setup from one of the times we did it there. We'll meter the water so we can charge SPU back for the water usage. And then we'll have to close the street during that whole week and do detours on there that allows us to do this jumper. But Shorewood will have water during this whole process. Questions?
I have a question.
George, go ahead.
When we send the bill to SPU for reimbursement, do we get reimbursed at the SPU rate or at the Mercer Island rate, or are they the same thing?
I that I don't know, because we run that through our finance department as far as what it is. I imagine we get billed through whatever SPU rate is that we're getting charged for.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, if I may, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see the full board? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
So I have a quick question.
Meredith, please.
Just because I'm new to the board, so I haven't really been through this before. So is what's happening is there'll be a shutdown on Mercer Island, but the residents won't, other than the Shorewood residents, won't really be aware of it because the water in the tanks will meet the consumer's water needs, presumably?
Correct. Yeah, so
Correct.
that's why we have this model. So there shouldn't be any, as far as our residents even knowing that, other than public outreach and letting them know what's happened as far as difference on there. And that's why we have it modeled. We have a safe hour as far as time frame we can do this in.
Right.
Shorewood, they will probably not even know the difference as well, other than seeing the hydrants put out there and everything. Because once they're, what we'll do is we'll actually activate those hydrants prior to them shutting off, so they won't see a difference as well either.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add that, yeah, lots of public notice will go out through our citywide communications. So we obviously coordinate with our fire department during this work as well. And I think that the important piece to know here is that it takes a significant amount of coordination and collaboration between not only the city internal departments, but also SPU. And there's, is just saying that we have a hydraulic model and we run the water model doesn't really do it justice in terms of the back and forth and the compromise that has to go into place to schedule the shutdown. It is a pretty big endeavor, and Alan's being very modest in terms of the impact to him and his team's workload with this project. It's a pretty big feat, and something we take very, very seriously, obviously.
Yeah, we don't plan to get any sleep that week.
Yeah, appreciate that. Vice Chair Milton first.
Yeah, so with the previous shutdowns only having been, 8 or 9 hours at a time, and this one going to 44 hours at a time, that's a pretty, large deviation. How confident are you in that kind of the model, and what's the kind of that buffer there in terms of if they screw something up, like the last time when they took them 2 days to try and repair, if they have, something like that where they have to spend a bunch of time to try and repair something, what's that kind of margin of error in that 44-hour, when 72 hours was too much, but 44 hours is okay? That still seems like a relatively narrow difference between those. It's not even like, it's not double. It's like, so what is that, what would that margin of error look like?
Well, that's why we were kind of conservative with the 44 hours, to be honest with you. We can actually go 62 hours as far as still have a margin of error on that. It takes our tanks below fire ban at 62 hours, but we still have that margin of error there. 72 hours took us way below what we wanted to be doing. And so that's why we're comfortable with the 44 hours.
Yeah, so we
And
aired on the conservative side, and then like I think a big piece of this too is we're in constant communication with SPU. So if something goes wrong early, we know about it early. We start to mitigate for it quickly throughout this process. And but we did take the conservative approach here. They did not like that. They pushed us a bit on it, and we held our ground and said, no, this is all we can do. Let's take it or leave it. I think it's also really important to note that given the amount of capital work that we have on our work plan, SPU has to get this work done, right? We all have deficiencies within our infrastructure, and this is no different for them as well. But given our capital workload, there's a very short window of opportunity for them to get this work done that matches and aligns our capital work that's on the docket. And if they don't meet this window to get this done, they're out of luck to get this moving for quite a while, just given the workload that we have in place as well.
William.
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of related to Steve's question. Do you have contingency plans in place if things don't go, as expected? Sounds like you obviously put a lot of thought into this, but have you come up with some sort of a backup plan if and when things go not as expected?
Unfortunately, we only have one feed to the island. We're not in a loop system, so there's really no contingency plan as far as if SPU fails at this, which I don't see they would. So they understand as well as, as far as the complexity of this and the reason they have to be back online with this at a certain time.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
We can't jumper hydrants to Beaux-Arts.
Not yet.
Well, at what point do we start advising residents, you don't need to flush every time? So
You do have an emergency well if really push something. Like that would be that's
a few years back,
right?
I saw the water that comes out of that well. That's got to be a real emergency. Will.
Wait, I had more questions, but I'll
Well, Will first, Meredith.
Yep.
On that note, since there is no contingency, is there at least a fallback from a communication standpoint? If something goes wrong, is the communications team ready to address this?
Yes, our communications team is part of that internal team that we have dialed in on this from the get-go, and they will be in constant contact with us. And we're not anticipating anything to go wrong. In fact, SPU is their window of construction actually is narrowed down themselves throughout the course of the project. When, as we started being more conservative, they have to change the way they do their work. And so they're confident they can get this done as well in a shorter period of time, but we're planning for the worst case scenario. And yes, absolutely, our communications team is part of that internal team. Then we have a communications tee up ready to go if and when necessary.
Good. Meredith.
So back to how this works. So there are supports in the slough, which is over on the east side, that are failing. And then there's pipe from the slough that goes across Mercer Island. Is this SPU pipe that goes through the slough, through Mercer Island to Seattle? And that's why that pipe is coming out? Or is it the pipe on Mercer Island that's failing? The supports for the pipe on Mercer Island that's failing?
I'll maybe pull that map up again if you can.
Yeah.
So the supports are, so you're 50% there. So the supports are on the east side. They're on the Bellevue side of the bridge that are failing. The pipe comes across. There's actually two pipes that come across, but there's the pipe that comes across, comes to Mercer Island, and then basically it converts to Mercer Island pipe at or near the boat launch facility.
Mhm.
It doesn't continue all the way across the island into Seattle. They have a different means to get water to Seattle.
Well, that's actually a picture of the pipe right there.
Okay,
And
Oh,
that's
yeah,
on the
that-
sluice side, correct?
That's on the sluice side, correct? Correct. So if you look at the map here, Mercer Island's over here. So this is actually on this is where the slough is here on this side here. And that's what they're going to disconnect and come around through the 19 or 16 inch, excuse me. So we're over here. We're not, it's not even on the island. We're doing the work.
okay, so I'm confused because there's the.
So-
Oh, I see, I'm looking, I'm with you now. I was not understanding the map. Thank you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions from the board? I have two, but I'll ask the first one first. Alan, I heard it's part of your presentation that one of the complications is the installation of the new booster chlorination station. And there's piping being done in the configuration of that. And I thought I heard you say that that's due to be done this month. Is that on track, on schedule?
Yeah, we're on track and schedule. In fact, we have to complete that work before we can do this shutdown. The reason being is we modeled it based on that work. Once we got to a certain point where we're in the distribution system where we had already reconfigured the piping, so there's no going back. So until we finish this completely, we can't actually do this shutdown.
But we're on schedule for that.
We're on schedule for that.
Great. I have one other, if no one else has a question. I want to be fair about sharing it. Longer term, if I'm construing this right, we're getting rid of a 30-inch pipe and it's going to be replaced with a 16-inch pipe
No.
long term?
No, the 30-inch pipe is just being disconnected from the 16-inch pipe. So it's apparent, if you look at the map, it's a parallel there. We're just taking the 30-inch pipe off of the 16.
The 16-inch pipe is SPU's main pipe that feeds Mercer Island. 30-inch has been there. It was historically the previous pipe they use predominantly, but the 16-inch, the column pipe that provides water to Mercer Island now.
Okay. So we're not going to have any reduction in our capacity when the project is over.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions about this project? No, this will be one, I think, if we all get to April 22nd and we haven't heard anything, everybody will be very happy. Thank you very much. Jason, anything else on that?
Nope. Thanks, Al. I appreciate it. Good job. And I know we're in good hands with you and your team. So thank you very
Absolutely. Thank you very much for all your work. Thank you for the careful planning for this.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Great. All right. Nothing else on that. The next item of regular business is our draft 2023 work plan, which was attached to the agenda. We've got some interesting stuff coming up. A utility update preview is for next month, as well as an update on the water meter replacement project. Look forward to both of those. I've only been on the board for now going on 11 years, and I've only been hearing about the water meter replacement project since I started. So it'll be interesting to see it come to a conclusion.
Does the board need me to share the screen, or you guys all have it in front of you?
The work plan?
Yeah, the work plan.
Why don't you put it on the screen? I
Okay,
think.
give me one just a
Jason.
second. I want to draw your attention to one thing too. Can you see it on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yep, as Chair McConnell said, we have our utility update preview. So spring is really a ramp up for our capital projects. So we'll start to look at, early 2023 projects that are scheduled for construction, and then downstream for 2024. The water meter replacement project is kicking into high gear now. So we will definitely give an update at April for that upcoming projects. We'll take a recess in May. June, we'll have our board elections, and then we'll again do our CIP update really as things have, they change from spring to summer in terms of actual construction schedules. So we'll really have a good time frame for those upcoming projects. That's usually when we try to do utility tours as well. Try and get some in-person tours for upcoming projects. So we'll coordinate that in June. What I want to draw the board's attention is really to that September meeting. So usually in the fall, we start talking about rates. And so September, we actually have 2 rate conversations or 2 discussions tied to rates on the docket. One is King County Solid Waste is changing the way they do their rate structure for King County Solid Waste. And so what does that mean for us? We have a contract with Recology. There will be a slight amendment that we have to make to our contract. We are getting we're getting Epic Center Services on board to help us with this. They're the consultant that helped us with the RFP when we went through the solid waste contract a few years ago. They've been helping a number of King County cities with this amendment with all haulers. And so they will come on board and help us with this with Recology. It's tied to September. We're going to start working on it now, but it's really be geared for the September conversation because that's when we'll know the updated rate numbers from the county that'll impact Mercer Island. So that work's happening behind the scenes. We'll come back to the board in September with an update on what the amendment looks like. And then another piece for the board that's been sort of an ongoing conversation has been this potential bond for some large capital projects. So your finance team and your public works team have been working with bond counsel to talk about what projects may or may not be applicable. And so we figured it'd be a good conversation and good discussion with the board in September to talk about what those projects look like and what we're thinking. And obviously what we decide will have an overall rate impact, which is scheduled for the October discussion. So we are going to try and partner the utility rates and the EMS rates in October together. If they need to push, we have a recess in November that we can call a special meeting for November and split them out. But I think we can probably get them both done in October. But that's what we're looking for into the fall. So some pretty big conversations, important conversations we had at the utility board.
Yeah, in most years past, I think we have recessed in August. This year, it would be unusual for us to be recessing both July and August. Is there any value to having either of those discussions about bond finance and whatnot in the summer rather than in September?
So we talked about that a little bit. Usually the month of August is when this citywide, we try and take a recess for boards and commissions as a whole.
Sure,
And
sure.
I think the July meeting timeframe is just going to be a little bit too soon to have that solid waste conversation or the potential bond issuance conversation. It's probably more geared, it's a better conversation for fall. If something changes, we can certainly slide one of those up into the July conversation. But right now, I think it makes sense to have in September. So that's, we did talk about that and had that conversation internally.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, issues? No? All right.
Just one small one, I guess. Just have the bond rates for the city level gotten as much worse as the rest of interest rates in general?
They haven't improved, put it that way. So that's part of the conversation we've had is I would say they're in a better situation than the rest of the rates out there, but they're still they're not as good as they were maybe 6 months ago, a year ago. They're still, Matt and I are meeting with our bond counsel pretty frequently to talk about it and just sort of monitor things and working towards those projects that are going to be included. And so I still think it's a worthy conversation to have with the board. There's definitely still value there.
Very good.
As you know, we have a significant amount of capital work on our plates to get done.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. Anyone else? Any further comments or questions? If not, I'll consider that item closed. Move on to the next item of business, the director's update.
So no formal report for me this evening, other than welcome Councilmember Jacobson to the utility board. He is our new liaison. Councilmember Anderl has moved on to a different assignment. So Jake, welcome. And then I will say the only other update I'll provide is board member Majewski reached out and inquired about some of the state legislation that's moving through the different houses, the House and the Senate. The city is monitoring a number of different bills. There could potentially be some pretty significant impacts in terms of the utilities. And so we're having some early conversations with both our modelers on the water side and the sewer side, depending on what happens with that legislation and how it may or may not impact our utilities. I think at the very least, if the legislation is passed, depending on which legislation is passed, it could add some work plan items, including perhaps updating the general sewer plan. And again, perhaps updating different elements of the water system plan, just depending on what legislation is or is not passed. The city's tracking it. I won't dive into all the details associated with it, but just know that your team is monitoring and working with our modelers right now to start staying ahead of things that may come down the pike.
Will,
Jason, just a question. I'm curious. Is the city getting any questions from the public around PFAS? That's, it's been in the news quite a bit, and we don't do treatment, but the public may not be very aware of that. So today was a big day with the EPA announcement.
It absolutely was. I was curious if anyone was going to ask me about that. So correct. We do not do treatment on the city side. It's something that I will be following up with SPU regarding what it means for their treatment, because obviously they're providing us treated waters that comes from Mercer Island. Haven't heard anything, any mumblings and grumblings from the community yet, but the big news was dropped today. Something that we'll be actively monitoring with SPU in terms of what changes may or may not be in play for us.
And what was that issue? I wasn't aware of this.
So the EPA basically came out and said that they're lowering the levels for, every year the city provides a water quality report, and the levels for the PFAS, which is, if Alan's still on here, he can tell you what the actual acronym is, or perhaps but it's essentially the levels that are allowable within our drinking water have been lowered substantially with the new EPA regulations that have come through. And so what does it mean for drinking water utilities across the United States is they're going to have to meet those new regulations.
It's much more of an issue typically with groundwater supplies and surface water supplies. So I don't think there'll be a big impact to this area.
Like Jake had a question or
I was just going there. Steve? Councilmember Jacobson?
Yeah, on behalf of the city council, I'd just like to thank all the members of the utility board for the time and effort they put in to ensure that we're on target and tracking as far as utilities are concerned. So thank you very much. And we all appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, I'll note our next meeting is April 11, same time, 5 o'clock. And I assume we're still doing hybrid meetings.
We are still doing hybrid meetings. We will likely do one in-person meeting before the end of the year. I'll work with Chair O'Connell, Vice Chair Milton, and the board to figure out what date that may work out for it. If we end up doing the utility tours this summer, that might be a good time to just do an in-person meeting that night as well. So, but I'll look at some dates and work with the board to figure out what date works best, but we are still going to be hybrid for April.
Very good. So unless there's anything else for the good of the order, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Member Lair, Vice Chair Milton, second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And goodbye.
Enjoy your sunny afternoon. It's still afternoon, guys. Isn't daylight savings time stuff?
Yeah, spring's coming.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.